If I didn't welcome you before, I'm joined here by Georgia Forte, who is a Cambridge examiner and the owner of a Cambridge accredited centre. Is that what you call it? Exam centre?
Yes, authorized exam centre.
Yep, in Naples. And she's working with MLA because we're offering some courses about Cambridge preparation, and we're going to be using her a bit for examinations and things like this. So I'd just like invite you to check out our website. If you're interested in Cambridge exams, we do provide online training courses, and we have a lot of professional teachers who prepare students for these exams. We do have a special promotion for students who are coming into summer schools. If you book by the 20th of December, you will receive 5 months of free English lessons, once a week English lessons. So check that out. Look at our social media, look at our website, and you'll find out information about that. Okay, but if you're not sending students on summer schools, then I think you'll find this very useful. Anyway, without further ado, let me just move on. Just remember that if you're joining us for the first time, remember that you will receive a certificate of participation and a webinar handout. Okay. And then so all the information in the slides you will receive in that webinar handout. Okay. If you don't receive that, the website there, you can write to me. Occasionally, for some reason or another, you might not receive it, but we'll get it out to you as soon as possible. Okay. I think we've had a bit of interruption there, but I think we're okay now. Okay. So, without further ado, we're going to, as I said, as we're waiting, this webinar will focus on the speaking exam of Cambridge B1 and B2, but the ideas and skills are relevant to other Cambridge exams, particularly C1 Advanced. Also IELTS, which is, a little bit different, usually I think it's a bit more for academics, people going to study in another country or in an English-speaking university. But whether you're doing exams or not, I think you're going to get some good ideas from this webinar. Okay. On the right, you'll see the sign from Georgia's school. She's got experience in teaching students, preparing students, booking students, and even examining students for these exams. Is that correct, Georgia?
Yes, I actually started off as a teacher almost 20 years ago now. And I started preparing Cambridge when I was students for Cambridge when I was about 20. So I have quite a bit of experience. And then in 2017, I was lucky enough to be authorized as an exam center. So afterwards, I also trained as a speaking examiner for emergencies, let's put it that way. So yes, I'll hope to give you some tips today, not only about the speaking exams, but in general, just to develop your students' speaking abilities and skills, not only for exams.
Yep. One of the things about this presentation is that we're going to give you some idea about how the speaking exam is structured at B1, but particularly at B2. But Georgia could also expand a little bit about how it works at B1 as well. And obviously, the more familiar with the exam format your students are, the more chance they'll pass and get a good grade. Okay. We will look at the outline and focus on also the grading criteria. Okay. Providing students with activities which recreate the exam task will certainly help them to pass the exam while improving their general speaking skills. Okay. As I said, even if you're not joining us with the intention of training students for Cambridge, I think we can all agree that speaking is probably the most important skill, and it's the skill that I think in Italian classrooms there's always room to do a bit more speaking and some interesting speaking activities. So I hope to give you these. Georgia, would you like to go through the objectives?
Yes. So by the end of this session, teachers will be better able to understand the different parts of the Cambridge B1 and B2 speaking exams and what they test for, create and use activities that develop speaking and performance in the class with students, and relate exam skills to their more general English lessons, like we said before. So this is not just to prepare students for Cambridge exams. This is a general webinar.
Yeah, and even if you've got some students preparing and some not, I think the activities will be beneficial to everyone. Okay. Starting from the B2 speaking exam, okay, the B2 speaking exam lasts about 14 minutes per pair of candidates. So you, as you can see in the picture, the students, the candidates are on the right. I assume it is, okay. And you have two examiners on the left, the interlocutor, is that correct, Georgia? And
yes.
the, what's the other one called? The observer?
Marker.
The marker, okay. So the woman on the extreme left, I think is the one, the interlocutor who would be talking, okay. Let us know if you know the four parts of the Cambridge B2 speaking exam, okay? So talking about the speaking exam here, let us know in the chat if you know what they are. I'm going to move on, but see if you can keep up with us while we go, okay? The first one, the first part, which takes about 2 minutes for each candidate, is just a general interview, okay? So it's general sort of questions about topics personal to the student. So generally about if they're school-age students, about their studies, hobbies, free time, sometimes a little thing about past experiences or future ambitions, things like that, okay? Then after that, it's moved on to what is sometimes known as the long term. That is speaking about 2 photos. The examiner will give you 2 photos. Yep, Rafaela's got it there, okay? And here we're comparing pictures, talking about a question related to the pictures. They also have a little part where after one student has described or talked about their pictures, they ask a little question to the other one for about 30 seconds that they can comment on their partner's pictures, and then the other student gets 2 pictures of their own. Okay. Moving on from there, we have a collaborative task. This is where basically for 2 minutes they look at some different topics based around a question, and they have to talk about the pros and cons of these different ideas. And then after 2 minutes, they're generally asked by the examiner to make a decision about, often it's usually which is the best idea, which one they prefer, or possibly sometimes what's the worst idea. Okay, but the aim of them coming to some sort of conclusion. And Roberta's got it. The last is a discussion, okay, which is sort of a further conversation between the candidates. So it should really be interactive, and it's based on that topic that was on part 3. So whatever the topic was that the collaborative task was based around, the questions will be around that one there, and that goes for about 4 minutes together. Okay. The grading criteria, as you can see, and this will be in the handout, it's always important to understand what the examiners will be looking for and how they can grade you. So at B2, there are 4 criteria. Grammar and vocabulary, which I think goes without saying. They're not going to ask the students questions about what is the present perfect, what's the second conditional, what's the past participle of this verb, okay? It will be using that grammar. So, you know, if they're talking about past habits, then used to is going to be useful. If they're talking hypothetically, then things like conditionals are going to be useful. Abundanza asked if you can have these slides. I can't give you the slides, but you will receive a handout, which is even better than the slides. It has this information and more on. So you will receive all this information that's on the slides. in a PDF format, and also some useful links. So don't worry about that. All the information you will receive. Discourse management. So how can you manage the conversation or the long term? Okay, so this is sort of how you actually, whether you're great at grammar or bad at grammar, how you can sort of keep the conversation or the exam, the long term going. Pronunciation, of course. Obviously, you don't have to have native speaker pronunciation or even really high, but appropriate for the level, and as long as you're not misunderstood. Okay. Paula asks, can I send a link? You will receive the information, all this the handout after the webinar. So when you receive your certificate, and on that handout, I put in a lot of links. So you've got a lot of videos, other things that you can prepare for these. So
and different material as well, right, Josh?
Yeah.
Like worksheets and other
Exactly,
stuff that can be
yeah.
used in class. Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of these things that you'll see in here you can use, and you'll have that. You can click on the links and share the links with your students. So for sure. Okay. And interactive communication. Okay. Obviously, these are all equally important, but some in certain parts might be considered a bit more important. For example, in part 2, where you have the long term, the picture description, discourse management, the idea that you can actually speak by yourself and plan this, starting maybe more specific and moving on to answer the question. Whereas in part 3, interactive communication, because you're talking to the other student, might be considered a little bit more important. Not that, you can ease up on the grammar or the pronunciation of those parts anyway. Anyway, in part 1 of the B2 exam, and Georgia, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the same in in B1 more or less, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah, also in A2 and yeah.
Okay. So what we have is, as you can see in the picture, which I've stolen from that website. I've also given you the link to that website in the handout. Okay. There will be 2 candidates. Okay, 3 in exceptional cases, although I'm not even sure if that happens anymore after COVID. Okay, there'll be 2 examiners in the exam room. However, only 1 examiner will speak. Don't worry, I don't think there will be a policeman or a nun in there, but that's what they chose to put in there. Yeah, who knows? Okay. In the interaction in the part 1, it's generally between the examiner and 1 candidate at a time. So the examiner asking questions, the candidate, that is the student, let's say, answering questions. Okay, although there is the possibility the student could ask a question, but it's not really encouraged as far as I know. The questions are generally going to be questions about studies, hobbies, likes, dislikes, holidays, free time, careers for maybe older students or adults. Okay. This is partly a bit of a warm up, as Georgia talked about in a presentation at our conference, our convention, sorry. It is very much a sort of idea that they're put at ease, that the students get comfortable. But I think one thing you should really remember is that if the students are going well, if they have the ability, then there's some really easy points if they lift their language up. What I do find is that a lot of students sometimes answer these questions at the same level as the questions. So the questions are often quite easy in the sense that, what do you do in your free time? Given that this is a B2 exam, it's really important that the answer is lifted up so you can really impress the examiner, okay? Some do's and don'ts. Here we're looking at B1, okay, which is, again, starts off with this sort of general interview, okay? First up, the do's. Remember that when you come into the room, obviously, good morning, good afternoon. Okay, greeting is important. Okay, answer in full sentences, give details. So not just yes or no, or even yes, I do. go on, expand on the question. Okay? I think it's always a good idea to sort of preempt the next question. So if they ask you, you know, what sort of food do you like? Maybe you can also say the food you don't like. Okay? Be ready for extra questions. Okay, so after you've answered one question, you just don't have the opportunity to answer the first one. Another question will be coming up as well. Okay. And then use different verb tenses. So it's always a good idea, as I was saying before, switch between just, you know, the question might be in present simple. What do you like doing in your free time? But it doesn't just mean you say, I like watching films, I go out with my friends. But, you know, I've been doing that for a long time. I often play the piano. I've played the piano since I was 5 years old. Things like that are going to impress the examiner, particularly at B1. But, you know, B2, you can use some higher level language as well. Adjectives to improve your marks: fascinating, great, excellent. I think this is really true that a lot of students, again, depend a lot on good, I like, fun, things like that. Whereas instead of just, you know, it's very good, why not use something like great, excellent, fantastic, amazing? Okay? These sort of more extreme adjectives.
Josh, this is true also for the writing. It's a good tip also for when preparing students for writing, because often students tend to use those expressions which they feel comfortable with, but it's that little switch that they need, like you said, switching the adjective, which makes the difference. Or adding,
there's always a chance to put in something that you didn't know 1 year ago.
Yeah.
Okay? That way, you know that you're putting in the language that you're at, you know, the level you should be at. Okay? But yeah, anything, it's your chance to impress in the speaking and the writing. I think, you know, the other parts of the exam, you're choosing a correct answer. Here, it totally depends on you. With the don'ts, okay, again, same sort of thing that you know, don't answer with a short word. Okay, you know, expand a bit. Okay, again, you know, try to answer in a bit longer way. Give some details. Okay, you don't need to keep going and fill up space. So it's not as if you have to give 4, 5 sentences. Keep going until the time runs out. Okay, but you know, a student at a low level, much lower than B1, would be able to answer a lot of these questions effectively, correctly with, you know, Giovanni Mazzini. Okay, say, you know, I go to Mazzini school. This is a school in blah blah blah. Okay. Don't panic if you don't understand. Remember that making mistakes doesn't mean you fail the exam. Okay, so I mean, even I don't understand everything people say. Georgia and I, you know, we're high level speakers, but we have our moments. And so, you know,
Sure.
I'm sorry, could you please repeat that? And they'll do it again. You know, don't get nervous. This is a really good point, that don't complicate your life. In writing, in speaking, if you don't know the word for something, it all depends on you. You know, say something else, invent something. Okay? So, you know, you don't know the word for this thing you saw the other day. You don't have to talk about it. Okay, that examiner is not really going to chase up you and find out if that's true. Okay, the same in the writing. A little bit like we said in the do's. Okay, don't use these sort of simple adjectives. You know, good, nice. I mean, there's a time to use those, but really, you want the dollar words, let's say, okay, that you know, the examiner can hear and really thinks, okay, that's a B1 level student, or B2, or maybe even higher. Okay, some students, you know, might go really well in the speaking. I'll hand over to Georgie in a moment. I'll just go through the advice and common errors. While the language questions might be simple, it's really good that if you can use the language to your full ability. So the sort of questions that people hear in the first part of the speaking exam, whether it's B1 or B2, are questions they will have heard before. They may have even heard them many years before. What do you do in your free time? But, encourage them in your lessons to use this grammar, use this vocabulary that they've learned in the lessons, avoiding the one sentence answers. Okay. See if they can go give an answer in 2 sentences. I think once you start going beyond 4, in my experience, the students start to repeat themselves. And, it's a bit of a case of diminishing returns, that they're going to sort of maybe use the language they've already used, become a bit boring. Wait, stop. The examiner will ask another question. Okay, it's really, this part at least is up to the examiner to sort of keep speaking. Instead of I like, there's a lot of alternatives I'm keen on, I'm fond of, things like this. Okay. One little trick I have is often telling my students when they're asked about what you like doing, okay, a second conditional, well, what do you like doing in your free time? Oh, I like a lot of things, but if I had to choose one, it would be, okay, if I had more free time, I would like to, okay. These are sort of things that, it's natural English, okay, but it just gets you out of the sort of thing, I like going out with my friends, which is not a wrong answer, but it's not particularly going to impress the examiner as much as a second conditional. And as I said before, after you've finished, after you've answered it well, don't keep blabbing, okay? They can, stop and wait for another question, okay? And also, as you can see in the picture, it's really important that you're listening, the students are listening to their partner. In these, you can also comment on your partner's things. So when it comes to your turn, if your partner's already spoken, you can always say something like, as my partner said, impresses the examiner that you're listening, when it's not your turn. I'll hand over to Georgia here with some classroom activities. Okay.
Yeah. So conducting a one-to-one conversation with every student in your class is not a productive use of your or their time, of course.
Obviously we'll do that occasionally and, closer to the exam, but, to get them speaking, I think we got to put them in groups. Okay?
Absolutely. Pair work is the key, like we said in Paris. Why not give the students the tools and opportunities to interview each other? Absolutely. I find that always works and it's always a good thing. The 3 things in common activity, it's a great activity the students can actually do with each other. So you put the students in groups of 2 or 3, and students must interview each other with the aim of finding 3 or more things that they have in common and details about these things. So
I think it's often, if you give them a task to do that they can't not do, if you know what I mean, that at the end of the 5 minutes or whatever you give them, they need to feed back and say what they found out. If it's going to be a lot more pressure on students if you just say to them, talk, it's a sort of no pressure, but it's in the same sense. It puts a lot of pressure on them to come up with topics, things like that. Give them something they can find, or to look for.
So give them a name. Each student reports back to the class to tell the class about the results. For example, Maddie and I are both keen on playing football, but Wiley's a different goalkeeper. So they're finding stuff about each other, finding out stuff about each other, and also they're practicing different verb forms, which is always very useful. Every time you give students a pair or group work speaking activity, make sure they have a purpose, like we said, so they have a name and they must report back to the class something. This is actually a great icebreaker activity if you have a new class, kids you've never met, kids that have never met each other. This is a really useful activity. And because without a verifiable purpose, students put into pairs or groups will have no motivation to complete the task, and you will often find them speaking Italian. it off.
Exactly. You might get lucky, and the first time they'll do it, they'll go
Mhm.
play along with you. But if you keep putting them into to pairs and say talk about this, and then bring them back into the class and say okay, let's move on, they're not gonna. They're realizing they're not being assessed. They're not being checked. Okay. I think the key to pair work is always that there's what they call the information gap. That
Mhm.
there is some information they need to get from the other person so that they can report it to the class. If they don't
Mhm.
do that, then they may as well be talking to themselves.
Absolutely.
Moving on to the second part, that is the long term, that is the picture comparison. We have interaction between the candidate who's speaking and the examiner who's listening. So it's a little bit flipped here. Okay? The examiner is not going to be talking as much. They will read the question and say, here are some pictures, I believe, but they're not going to, it's basically up to the student to be talking. Okay. And the other person should be paying attention even if they're not talking, because they will need to comment a bit later. Okay? Discourse management's really important here. Okay? 1 minute of speaking should be relevant, organized, and use some discourse markers. So while obviously this is the reason why they're giving you 2 pictures at the B2 level. I think at B1 level, they just give you one picture, if I'm correct. Okay. And so you might not need to use those as much. You can describe the 1 picture, but the 2 pictures, and in fact, even at C1 level, they have 3 pictures of which you can talk about 2. In that case, there's the idea that you're comparing one with the other. So not only are you describing a picture, but you're saying about how they're different, similar. After 1 minute, the examiner will stop the candidate. It doesn't mean that you have to finish exactly on that 1 minute. It just means that they will move you on and ask the other candidate a question about the same photos. However, that's a sort of smaller question. And usually it's enough to sort of say, well, I agree with my partner, or I disagree with my partner. I think this. Okay? So maybe 1 or 2 sentences there, whereas it's going to be a bit longer term when you're speaking for the full 1 minute. In this, you have these a picture like the one in the background, obviously, well, the one in the image, obviously without the text on there, but I put this picture in the handout. These sort of directions can be really useful, in the foreground, in the background, in the middle, at the top, on the left or the left-hand side, on the right-hand side. These are going to be things so you can really be clear, because, you're not going to have the opportunity just to point to these things. Okay. Remember that these are sort of things that B1 is going to impress people with. Okay. I think in B2, it's often a better idea not to so much concentrate on describing the picture as try to sort of imagine people's motivations, make judgments, make deductions. Some good sentences would be, for example, for this one, in the middle, there's a woman who might be a teacher looking after the children. In the foreground, we can see 2 children who are studying hard. So remember any actions, or remind your students that any actions are going to be talked about in the present continuous. Any general states are going to be talked about in the present simple. Okay? You can't really talk about actions in the present simple. The students study doesn't really make sense. What we're talking about is what they're doing at that moment. Just some advice. Okay, you need to describe for B1, need to describe everything you see in the picture for up to 1 minute. Okay, so you can talk about the scene, what the people are wearing, if that's relevant, even if it's not. If you run out of things to say, you can always put that in. What they're doing is probably the most important thing. I think, as far as I know, I've never seen any pictures that don't have people in them. So they're going to be actions, okay? People doing things, okay? Might not always be clear what they're doing, but you can make deductions. What objects you can see and how the people are using them. Speculate too. This brings you up to the very top of B1 and even into B2 if you can use these modals of deduction or speculation. Things like it could be a classroom or a busy library. She looks like a teacher, but could be a librarian. They might be studying for an exam. Maybe they're studying for an exam. It must be a library. Okay. So practicing this with students is always a great idea. And I think on another idea is get your students to record themselves, okay, and listen to their answer. You know, when they're talking, they're concentrating on talking. They can sort of notice their errors when they record themselves, or pairing up, and the other student can mark down the errors. Not that errors are always something that they need to be too worried about. Occasional errors are not bad as long as they have a sort of level of fluency. In B2, describing the pictures, sorry, B1, describing the pictures is key. B2, I don't think you want to waste too much time describing the photos because you can be really using sort of a lot of B1 language doing that. I think focusing on the motives and the feelings. And you also have this question, as you can see up the top there, we have the question, why are the people enjoying these experiences? I think the best way to do that is use comparisons of the photos to answer that question. Don't start with the comparison and then move towards the question. So, you know, I think the guy at the top is enjoying it because, whereas at the bottom, she seems to be enjoying it because. Yeah. So, for example, sitting by a lake is a good way of spending time with a child, while a man in the lower photo is probably camping and enjoying being in close contact with nature. Sorry, this is obviously a different couple of images there. Okay? Don't make a point about one picture without comparing it to the other one. Okay, so you know if you're talking about the young man in the top picture, whereas the lady with looks like her son or her daughter there in the second one, okay, using these sort of comparison words while, whereas, in contrast. Okay. The question on the other candidate's topic, which you can sort of see at the bottom of this page, do you enjoy cooking, will be not necessarily exactly tied into the people in the picture, but more about the activity. Okay. Obviously, it's a good idea for your students to be listening to their partners at all times and seeing what they can expand on their partner's answers. Okay. I'll hand over to Georgia for the classroom activities, okay, for this, particularly for, well, it can be actually B1 or B2, probably a bit better for B2, but it'd be useful for B1 as well.
So the most useful classroom activities should always begin with giving students a list of useful language for comparisons and deductions. There are links to the websites containing these in the handout that you will receive after this webinar. So these could be useful.
Yeah, got put in quite a few useful websites there. You actually probably find them in textbooks as well. Okay.
Okay, there is the Google image search activity, which is always a good idea. So give each pair of students a phrase to search for using Google image. So they can just search on their device. For example, they can search for people by the sea, people singing, people cooking, like we saw before.
Yeah, so I think the idea is that you know, if we have these things, you don't have to go and seek out Cambridge preparation material. Let the students do the work.
Yes, they'll probably be happy to use their phone anyway, unfortunately. Exactly. The phrase and therefore the pictures must include people. We said that before. So each student basically finds a picture, and then one student must describe why the people are in this place or doing this activity or enjoying this place or how they're feeling. So in general, talking about the picture.
And particularly, I think focusing on motivations or feelings is always a great idea to get them up to sort of B2 level. Okay?
Repeat for the other student using, of course, a different search term. So they have different, they also touch upon different topics and different lexicon. And rotate the search terms between pairs. Absolutely. So everybody gets a chance to speak about different things.
You could even open it up to the class to brainstorm some images, some expressions to search for, so phrases. Okay.
Students must use a number of the expressions on the worksheet or on the whiteboard, depending where you put them.
Yeah,
so it's good practice for them. Yeah.
Okay, we'll move on to B2 part 3, okay, which is a collaborative task. Okay. Here you're going to have a sheet a little bit like this with a question in the center and some ideas around the side. I think there's usually 5 or occasionally 6, I'm not sure. Generally these, the idea is that they give these to the 2 students. They have a little bit of time to look at it, and then they have about 15 seconds to read, and then they discuss it for 2 minutes. Okay. The interaction, as you can see down below, the interaction is primarily between the 2 candidates. Therefore, the 2 examiners there become listeners. Okay? It's really important that it becomes a conversation. You know, this is testing the fact that students can't just answer a question or give a speech, but they can actually hold a conversation, take responsibility for a conversation with someone of about their own level. After this 2 minutes, the examiner will ask another question, which the candidates have a minute to answer. Okay, that question in general is going to be something like, which one do you think is the best idea? Sometimes which 2, okay, possibly even which 2 don't you like? Okay? Just some advice, okay, is that it's really important that the more it becomes a conversation, the better it is. Okay, so not just speaking, the idea of listening and showing that you're listening in the sense that you respond to the other person, okay, is really important. Okay, so I think it's always a good idea to encourage the students to turn around and face the other person. The examiner will be there, will be listening, but it's hard to interact with someone if you're not looking at them in the face. Okay? You can pre-teach this asking for and responding to opinions. Okay, in the handout, I've given you some websites where you've got some expressions that you can use. Okay, other students often answer the second question early. So what I'm saying is that you need to be careful, because the question that's coming up after 2 minutes is probably going to be about the best. Which one do you think is the best idea? So why not emphasize that they should spend the 2 minutes talking about if they're good or bad ideas, if they're better or worse, maybe not using a superlative or choosing one, okay? Because then you can have nothing to speak about after then, okay? So the 15 seconds at the beginning, okay, read the question, okay, answer it, not the question that you've got in your head. So this is a little bit the same with the essay in the writing that we'll be looking at in 2 weeks. Got to be focused on the fact that these points around the side are there as possible answers for the middle question. They're not topics of their own. So, you know, we're not going to spend two minutes talking about building a large nightclub, but 2 minutes talking about if that is one of a few ideas that might be good. Okay. It's not always necessary to talk about all of them. Okay. So you don't necessarily need to talk about all the points, but it would be really wasting it if you don't talk about at least 3 or 4 of them. Okay. So, you know, if there's one you're not so keen on, or maybe the students don't understand, I guess they could avoid that one, but, or even give it to your partner. Okay. Ask your partner about it. Some useful language is, for example, which one shall we start with? Getting started, obviously passing it, giving the other student the option of starting, taking the opportunity yourself. What do you think? I think you know a lot about. Well, what's your opinion on it? Okay. Moving to the next item. Again, sometimes we even do this in my classes, keeping the time, and I say change. Okay, so after about 15, 20 seconds, they need to change to another one, which really keeps it moving. And it means that they only have enough time to express their opinion simply and ask their partner about it. Okay? Because getting through 5 topics in 2 minutes really only gives you 20, 25 seconds. Shall we move on to this topic now? What about, I wonder if we can compare to, what about this one? What do you think about this idea? How do you feel about that one? We're running out of time, so let's move on. These sort of expressions can be really good just to learn, right? I mean, this is speaking English. It's not, doesn't mean you have to be conscious every moment of what you're saying. Use these pre-planned expressions. Okay? We need to discuss this topic. That connects with the next topic. I think moving on is a real skill that some people, some students forget. Okay? This is similar to the last one. Maybe we can skip it for now. And then ending your turn. Remember that I always tell students that if you manage to talk for about 50% of the time, obviously not the first 50 or the second 50, but 50% in general, then you're going to be going well. If you're speaking more or less than that 50%, you're either you're taking up too much time or not enough. So, give the other person an opportunity. It's not a race between one student and the other. What do you think? Don't you agree? Do you have anything to say about that? Do you have anything to add to that? Did I forget anything? Moving on to part 4, okay, because we are coming up, we're going a bit over time. In this part of the exam, you have about 4 minutes to talk about the topic. So if we go back to that one before, let's just go back. What would these ideas, why would these ideas attract more tourists to the town? Then the topic of part 4 might be a little bit about traveling or tourism, okay, things that you look for in a town, okay? So it's going to test your opinion, to get your ability to give opinions, okay? The examiner will ask you a question, you're answering it, but it's not the same as part 1, okay? It should be, again, directed towards your partner, the student's partner, and they should be talking about these topics. The examiner will ask you a question, but then it's sort of the start of a conversation. Okay? Again, if they've talked about that question for enough time, the examiner may ask another one. These questions are going to be less about your experiences and more about opinions. So they're not going to be questions about, do you like traveling, as much as, I don't know, do you always think tourism is a good thing for a city? What are the problems that tourists can cause? Right? Some of the possible topics are travel, your home country or city, learning English. Okay, so these might be part 3 might be about, ways you can learn English, watching TV shows, things like this. Okay, shopping, etc. Carlotta asks, can we send you these? Yes, you will get all of the content of the webinar in a handout. So send out to you. If you don't, I've got a website, an email address that you can send. Shopping, free time, TV, work study. So, the topics that I think you would expect P2 students to be comfortable talking about, focusing on their opinions. The environment's always a good one too, because it's, to be honest, these sort of topics are very similar to the topics for the exam that we'll be looking at in 2 weeks as well. Okay. I'll let Georgia give some conclusions.
Mm-hmm. So, as well as recreating the speaking exam tasks, there are many fun activities that teachers can use, like we said. So many different, use the exam speaking for the speaking exam format to develop the student skills in general.
Yeah, I think it's always important that we look at the exam as not an end itself. It's actually, a gauge of how well the student's speaking. So practicing for the exam is going to help you in the exam, but more importantly, it's going to help you in real life. Okay?
So with a little guidance, you can involve students in the preparation of the speaking activities. Like we said, like, for example, if you have them search their own pictures, they feel more involved in the process, and obviously it will save you time, make them feel important. And
Yeah, I think this is sort of a key thing that we generally do in these webinars, give the idea that, you know, we're opening it up to the students, let them talk about what they're interested in. Okay? In the end, the question, that's the idea of the exam, that we're looking at their opinions, their experiences.
yeah. So remember that using the internet, you will have a much larger variety of visual resources for part 2, part 3, than just those in your textbook. So you don't have to go around searching on too many websites or flicking through your book constantly, but they can just search.
Consider also showing your students some videos on YouTube. If you search for Cambridge speaking, you'll get a lot of real exams taking place, whatever level it is, and I think you'll find that'll be helpful. You know,
Absolutely.
often puts the students a bit at ease to see that students are not necessarily perfect, that they make the occasional errors, but you know, we're not talking. It's not a C2 exam. They don't need to be perfect, and to be honest, even at C2, the occasional error is not a problem.
It's always a good idea to put students into pairs or groups for speaking activities, since this will definitely maximize their speaking time, rather than having the teacher try to interview every single student. It's a lot easier to have them interview each other, and also the peer-to-peer communication often makes them feel a lot more comfortable, also with mistakes. So it definitely improves their speaking abilities and also confidence.
Yeah, exactly.
Teaching, explicitly teaching interaction patterns through games and activities will help with the conversation, like we said, both under exam condition, but most importantly in the real world. I mean, the aim is to have your students be able to have a conversation, not during the exam, but while they're traveling, while they're at uni, in a job interview. That's the real objective, real life English.
And this ties into the fact that, you know, while we're talking about Cambridge exams, you know, these actions, these activities, the Google image search, these are going to be useful anytime, you know, whether in real life you want to explain what you saw, what you're looking at when you're calling someone. Okay, so describing a picture is going to be useful. Talking about topics, talking about your past, talking about opinions is always going to be useful.
Sharing opinions, absolutely, yes.
Okay. And I think that's also ties into our the writing that we'll be doing. You know, even though an essay might not be something that students are going to write. I don't know if I've written an essay since I left school.
I don't think I have.
Yeah, but it's preparation for making an argument, the language, you know, to convince someone. Okay, and this is the sort of thing that's going to be useful in future. Okay, and to be honest, you know, if they're going on to higher education, they're going to be writing essays if they're doing it in English speaking universities. Anyway, as always, I'll just open it up for suggestions. Feel free to email us suggestions too. Put them in the chat now if you like, but email them later. As I said, we will be focusing on Cambridge exams because we do get a lot of requests about this for this webinar and the next one in 2 weeks. But you know, we're still looking for new topics. We're always taking on board new topics. Okay? I'd like to thank most of all Georgia for joining us. She'll be joining us again in 2 weeks to help us with the Cambridge writing. And I'd like to thank all the participants here. You, as I said before, you will receive a certificate of participation, a handout with the activities, descriptions, all the text you've seen, most of the useful images, and you will receive that. If you don't, that's the email. I'm trying to make sure people get them eventually. Okay. Next week is a holiday, so
Mhm.
enjoy your Immaculata next Thursday. And then
Yes.
on Thursday, the 15th of December, we'll have the last one before Christmas,
Mhm.
which will be preparing students for Cambridge writing. Okay. Again, it'll be a bit B1, B2, but whether you're doing exams or not, I think it's going to be useful. If it's your
Definitely.
first time, thanks for joining us. And I hope to see you again. If you've joined us before, I hope you join us again in the future as well. Thanks a lot, Georgia.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, everybody, for taking part, and see you in 2 weeks.
Right, certainly. Okay, bye-bye.